Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Farming and Solar Power Partners for Resiliency with Beth McGuinn at NOFA New Hampshire's 20th Annual Winter Conference. And I'm Nikki Kolb, NOFA New Hampshire's Operations Manager. I'll be hosting this session with Carl Johnson, President of NOFA New Hampshire's Board of Directors. First, please note that we are recording this session and all sessions throughout the conference, and we'll share the recordings with you at the end of the week. Everyone will be muted during the workshop, so please type your questions into the chat box throughout the discussion, and I'll read out your questions when we get to the Q&A portion of the session. NOFA New Hampshire aims to foster an inclusive, safe, open, and welcoming environment for all, and we encourage participants to keep questions and comments constructive. For technical issues, please feel free to communicate publicly through the chat. And if you'd like to access closed captioning, click on the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, click the arrow on the CC icon, and then click Show Subtitle. And if you're watching in a smaller screen, click the three buttons at the bottom of your screen that read More, and then click Show Subtitle option. And if you have questions, you can reach out in the chat on how to use that. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that this conference is taking place on the land of the Pennacook tribe, or N-Daki-Na, the Abenaki word for the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the Al-Nobak, or people, who have stewarded this land through the generations. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Beth McGuinn of Revision Energy. Hi, Beth. Thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here, Nikki. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, so I will share my screen. Hello, Joan and Linda and Jeffrey. Glad to have you here. And I know that this is being recorded, and hello to all the folks who are watching later on. I'll share my screen. All right, can you see that now?
Perfect.
I think. There we go. So I titled this workshop Farming and Solar Powers. Resilience is part of the winter conference theme this year, and I feel like farming and solar power have so much in common. Farming relies on the sun, and boy, if we could power more of our need for electricity from the sun, we'd all be a lot better off. I know that farmers are feeling the effects of climate change probably more than anybody else in our society right now, with big deluges of rain and followed by heavy drought and hot temperatures. Weird ice in February and 50-degree temperatures. So I'm hoping that we can all have a positive impact on that. For those of you who don't know me, let me give you a little more of an introduction. My focus in my life has been land. I love land. I'm a trained forester, was licensed until last year. I've spent most of my career doing land conservation, working with lots of farmers to conserve their properties to make sure that soils stay available for agriculture, working with other landowners to make sure that their land and the public benefits that come from that land are conserved forever. I took that work and did it for 25, 30 years. And I got to a point where I really felt like I wanted to have a different impact. And so in the last year, I made a big switch over to working on solar power with Revision Energy. And I am working with landowners who want to have a big impact on climate change by putting solar on their farms or their forests, on their land, to help feed the energy to people who can't generate their own. So that is what brings me here today, a great interest in solar. My home is fully powered by solar, as is part of my car, and a great interest in agriculture. I live on a homestead farm where we grow most of our own vegetables and fruits and raise some chickens for eggs, and love supporting our local farmers as well. So that gives you some sense of where I'm coming from for this presentation. So I do now work for Revision Energy, and it is very interesting to go from a nonprofit to a for-profit entity. And I feel like I didn't make much of a switch because Revision is mission driven, wanting to help New England transfer from using a lot of fossil fuels to using solar power instead. We're a B Corp, which means that we're not just looking at the bottom line for financial income. We're also really cognizant of and working towards a good environment and a good place for people. So the issues of environmental, economic, and social justice are very important to us also. We're about 300 strong, a little bit more than that. And this slide is a little bit outdated. We've done about 12,000, 13,000, somewhere in there, clean energy systems from solar electric panels to hot water to air source heat pumps, which are electrically driven, to battery backup, and also charging for electric vehicles. So that gives you a little sense of who Revision is. And why am I talking about solar in the cold part of New England where we're northerly? Why don't we concentrate all our solar panel in the south where there's much better solar resource? Well, it's true that in the south, they have more sunlight, more hours of sunlight in the season. They're also warmer. And believe it or not, the panels behind me are going to produce power more efficiently in the snowy time, in the cold time, than the panels that are hot in Florida and Texas. And New Hampshire is at about the same latitude as the French Riviera, a place where we think of as a sun and fun place. Our solar resource is the same. And in Europe, it's Germany who is leading the way with solar, and they are far north of where we are located. So we really do have a good situation for solar. And you'll hear the argument sometimes that it just doesn't make sense to do solar here, and that's just not true. Why solar on the farm? Well, it's clean, renewable, and plentiful. If we didn't have enough sunlight, we wouldn't be growing plants, but we do have enough sunlight here, and we can also grow some good, resilient, renewable, clean power, either for our homes or for our farms, or both. The system that you see here is at Full Circle Farm, and I'm sorry, I took these from a big slide deck of farm projects, and I can't tell you where it is, but this is a 13 kilowatt array of solar. It produces more than 2.5 times what my solar produces on my house. So this is a small system for a farm, but it is what these folks needed. They have a big roof. They could have put on more if they wanted to. And just powering a small amount of electricity that a homestead farm or a small market garden produces is entirely possible. This array is Fedco's array, 60 kilowatts, helps them produce the power they need to get all our seeds together and keep them cool before they send them out and run the electricity that takes our orders and pulls things together for us. Why solar on the farm? Well, it reduces energy costs and it reduces fossil fuel use. Farmers can purchase their solar power outright, which sounds a little scary. I think we all know that this is an expensive endeavor, usually in the tens of thousands of dollars. But it is possible to take out low interest loans for solar. And those loan payments should be equal to or less than the cost of your electric bill. So if the farm uses a couple thousand kilowatts of energy during their peak season, and they have a very high bill, that bill should be evened out over the year with a loan payment. So trading an electric bill for a loan payment usually will save money even when you're paying off that loan, because the loan payment will stay steady and the electric prices we've seen recently will continue to go up. We don't expect electric prices to come down. Especially for farmers, or specifically for farmers, well, for everybody, there is a 26% federal tax credit for the purchase of solar power to cover your needs. For farmers in particular, it's possible to get a REAP grant, and that is just for farms. And that grant can provide either $20,000 or 25% of the cost of the system, depending on which grant cycle you're in. Farmers can work with their solar provider to determine when it is best to apply for those REAP grants. And I'm not sure if all providers will do the grant applications for you. I know that Revision has been successful in at least a dozen REAP grants over time. So this is something that is especially for farmers and very, very helpful. For farms that are owned as an LLC, there's also the potential to take an accelerated depreciation on the cost of the panels. I'm not going to be able to give you a whole lot of details on that because I'm not an accountant and depreciation is above my head. But it is something that if you have a tax burden, you can take that depreciation against it. So if that is of interest and seems like it might be a fit for you, it is something to talk with your financial advisor about. With those different discounts, grants, and accounting measures, it's possible to pay back a system in 5 years. With the electric prices the way they are right now, Unitil has just gone up 10 cents a kilowatt from the summer. It's more like 8 cents a kilowatt from last winter. That's pretty significant. It's a doubling of the cost for the supply of electricity. That payback time may reduce if we have it over time, if it continues to be that high. Other systems might pay back in as much as 8 years. But I think what's really important to remember is that these panels are warranted for 25 years. And just like a car that's warranted for 3 years and 36 months or 36,000 miles, it doesn't stop working at that point. You continue to go and the car continues to work. In fact, I've kept cars for 15 years, long beyond the warranty. We expect that that's the case with solar panels as well, and that the life of the panels is 40 or more years. We know that that's true because we have people, we know of people, I know personally friends who put solar panels on their roofs in the 80s, in the early 80s. That's 40 years ago now. And they have tested their panels to see if they have lost capacity. And they have, and that's expected. But the fellow who I talked to recently said that he's lost 10% of capacity over 40 years. We at Revision assume conservatively that you would lose 0.5% of capacity a year. I don't see that in my panels that I've had now for 10 years. But we are conservative, and if under that situation, over 40 years, you might lose 20% of your capacity to produce electricity. These are non-moving parts. They don't require any maintenance. They do require inverters, and the inverters will need to be replaced at some point during that 40 years. But just like any generation of electricity or your furnace or boiler, there's a time when it wears out. The inverters are like that, usually 15 to 20 years on those. Why solar on the farm? Maybe you want to charge your electric tractor. These are pretty pricey right now, but they do exist. And just like an electric car, We expect the price to go down over time, but for those early adopters, these are 5 times more efficient than a diesel fueled tractor. They're a whole lot quieter, 2,000 times quieter. It only has 1 moving motor part versus 30 in a diesel engine, so a lot less can go wrong. About 8 times less the operating costs, and 10 times less the maintenance costs. So if you have the money, or if you want to take out a loan for an electric tractor, if you can find one, these are going to be more and more attractive over time because they save money along and along. So, and you're using, if you have your solar power, you're using renewable resources to power the tractor. Why solar on the farm? Well, if you have a panel system like this, a long, narrow one, or a couple of rows on the ground, you might want to plant pollinators under them to help pollinate the crops that you're growing. It's one of the things that we are experimenting with and learning about, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Why solar on the farm? Maybe you have a flock of sheep. I am working with someone right now. Ellen looks like she might have a flock of sheep. No? I am working with a landowner right now who wants to put solar on one of their pastures so that they can move the sheep to that pasture in the summertime so that the sheep are shaded. And they'll produce electricity for the farm at the same time. So there are multiple uses, dual uses that can be made between farming and agriculture. And we're only learning the beginning of this now. So these pictures are only of sheep. You don't see goats here. Can anybody guess why there are no goats here? Feel free to come off your mic.
Chewing.
Yeah, goats love to chew, and chewing wires that are high capacity or high voltage really is not good for the goat, and it's not good for solar either. I've also seen, can anybody else guess another reason why? I'll tell you, it's goats climb, and I've seen videos of goats climbing all over solar panels. And the warranty on solar panels is 25 years, but it doesn't include goat traffic. So, so goats are not great. Cows are, if we were able to raise them up quite a bit, it might be possible to put cattle underneath. They're still experimenting with that. Usually the panels are a little lower than we'd want for cattle. They love to scratch. I can't blame them. But right now cattle aren't great, but pastured chickens or pastured rabbits would be fantastic under solar panels. So lots of opportunity for grazing under solar panels. If it is a commercial site, we're working with a shepherd right now who wants to bring her flock from site to site to site. One of the advantages of working in a solar array, a big solar array, is that there's usually a fence around it already. And you can put internal fences in between to move from paddock to paddock to do rotational grazing. Agrivoltaics is what we're calling agriculture that is combined with solar power. Many of you may have seen the fellow in the lower left-hand side. He seems to have a really good publicist. This is Jack's Solar Garden out in Colorado, and they are doing some experimentation out there. His family ran a farm that was not doing great, not making money, losing money, growing alfalfa. And he didn't want to continue that. He wanted to do some other things. He wanted to diversify the income of the farm, and he wanted to put solar panels on, but he decided to farm under them. And so he's doing a lot of experimentation about what can be grown under solar panels and what is the best way to grow things under solar panels. It's not a direct correlation between what he can do in Colorado and what we might be able to do in New Hampshire. So I'm really interested in working with some farmers who have solar panels on their property to find out what they can grow. There's a lot of research being done. You can see in the upper left, that looks like beans to me. So somebody's growing beans under solar panels. The one in the lower right, it looks like kale under solar panels. I don't know about you, but I cannot grow lettuce or spinach in the summertime. But if you were to try to grow those crops under solar panels between the rows where there's some shade and some cooling, I'll bet they would do better. And it should be that there's less evaporation under the panels. And so it's possible there might be less of a need for irrigation. So this can be a win-win situation where we have solar panels that are bifacial. In other words, they can create solar panel from below as well as from above. The reflection from green crop is going to produce more solar energy from below than gravel or concrete or just sand. So it's a win-win. The other piece is that it keeps the panels cooler, and we've already talked about the fact that cooler panels produce energy more efficiently. So there's a lot more experimentation, learning, research going on about this right now. There's UMass is doing some, that's the closest I can find. UMass is doing some research right now on growing crops and grazing under solar panels. I'm excited about that. I'd love to get Cooperative Extension in New Hampshire interested in doing some formal studies of crop growth under solar panels and what kind of solar panels work with crops. Solar in New Hampshire is, our policies aren't quite where the policies in the other New England states are, which is unfortunate for us, but hopefully will change. So putting in much more extensive high solar panels with a higher cost and a lower concentration of solar panels is more costly, and it makes sense to do that for some farming instances. But in other states, in order to do that, they provide funding to do good agriculture and good solar on the same property. So we'll see if New Hampshire or the federal government can come up with some opportunities. I think we all realize that the 1 or 2% of New Hampshire's mix of solar isn't enough. And though there's a lot going on roofs, even with all the rooftop solar that we see around us, we're still only at 1 to 2% of our energy mix in solar. And unfortunately, there aren't enough roofs and parking lots and gravel pits and landfills to meet the need for solar. So we're trying to find ways that are appropriate to use other land with solar. So all of this experimentation is welcome. The other opportunity for farmers is more of what I'm working on, which is leasing land, primarily or preferably marginal fields or fields that have recently been abandoned for solar power. These tend to be lower slope, less rocky because the rocks have been picked, and much more suitable places for solar than other pieces of land. At the same time, prime agricultural soils are precious in New England. And unless we're able to really do some good dual use, I don't think there's anybody who really wants us to use prime ag soils in a way that would make them not available for agriculture anymore. So the experimentation that's going on will help us there. The only places where a lease situation for solar would work is if there's 3-phase power at the road. And I'll show you what three-phase power looks like. But it is not common in New Hampshire. It is more concentrated in the areas where there's population in town centers and city centers, and not so much on the areas that are further out. South facing, a little bit southeast, a little bit southwest, that all works for solar. The leases provide a modest annual income for farmers, an opportunity to diversify income, and that lease payment grows over time. This particular array is a 1.5 acre array. I'm sorry, 1.5 megawatt array. It's probably about 5 to 7 acres of solar. In New Hampshire, we can't do an array this size. We can only go up to 1 megawatt of solar panels. So about 2/3 of what you see here. In theory, we will have an increase at some point in time in New Hampshire that will allow us to go and do larger installations. But for now, the 1 megawatt is what we can do. So if there are farms that are interested in diversifying income, have some marginal fields, marginal land that they don't plan on using for farming anymore. This farmer was going to abandon these fields because it just wasn't a productive field for him. That solar is a possibility. Let me show you what three-phase power looks like. You see the power poles running down this road have a crossbar on them, and there are 3 wires that run from either end of the crossbar and the center part of the crossbar from pole to pole. That is three-phase power, and that is a more robust power pole than the single poles without the crossbars, which only have 1 wire going across the top. And they are, the three-phase power are the ones that can handle generation of electricity for solar panel, solar power being transported to people who don't have the ability to do solar on their own. This is only necessary for a lease situation or for a generation situation, not for a situation where you're generating power for your property, for your own use. Here's a few more instances of farms that have put solar on their properties. This is Mafka. They have, I haven't been to a Common Ground Fair for a few years, but they now have solar on almost every building that they own that's oriented the right way. This is a 70 kilowatt array, but they do have much more elsewhere. I think you can see some further in the background. But they have really, really taken it to the maximum that they can do. Here's a place called Mayfair Farm. Looks like they might have horses. A 40 kilowatt array on their rooftop. And I'll say, if your farm has rooftop ability, that is probably your best bet for solar. It's less expensive to install, and it doesn't impact the land. So you want to have it on the roof if you can. Here's one in Maine where this size is possible. A 250 kilowatt array. This is a lease situation. This farmer could do crops in between the solar panels or under them. It doesn't look like they're taking advantage of that opportunity. It looks like they're mowing it. We'd really rather not mow under solar panels if we can help it. It's just silly to run a fossil fuel machine back and forth to mow the solar panels. It just seems ironic to do that. But we talked about pollinators. Pollinator opportunities between solar panels are a great option where it doesn't have to be mowed during the summer. But even if you let it grow up to what comes naturally, and if you're not worried about introducing weed seeds into your beds for crops, that is also a possibility. Just do a wildlife mowing once a year, maybe in August, maybe in November, once or twice, and that's it. Here are some other examples. It is possible to do fixed pole mounts. Again, you should be able to grow crops underneath of this. Fixed tilt ground mounts are what we typically do, and that is a typical installation that might power a farm. And there is the option of dual access trackers. They can tilt up and down, and they move with the sun every day. They do have moving parts, and though the solar panels are guaranteed, the mechanism that turns it is not, and it does require some maintenance. Some larger installations, you can see the shading in the winter time in that upper right-hand corner. The shading would be less in the summer when the sun is higher. We are working hard to make use of as many degraded sites as possible. Landfills are one kind of area that it can't be used for anything else. And though it is takes a special mounting mechanism to make that work, it is worth putting solar on every landfill that has been capped anywhere we find them, if we can do that. And that's all from me. I am more than happy to answer questions or hear your thoughts and your ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Beth. And I collected a few questions from the chat that I'll ask first. And then if others have questions, excuse me, that you'd like to put in the chat, or if you would like to come off mute and ask Beth directly, I think that's okay with Beth. We've talked about that. So Linda had a few questions. Linda asked, what about wildlife, deer, moose, etc., interacting with solar panels? And also, what's the status on New Hampshire solar farms and infrastructure? Those were a couple of questions.
Well, let's go with the deer and moose. If you are putting solar on for your own property, it's probably small enough that the electrical requirements would not require a fence. For the larger installations, they do require a fence. So I don't know what the track record of deer and moose are for chewing on or rubbing on solar panels. So I'll have to ask that question of some of the folks I know who have panels that are not fenced. When the situation is fenced, when the solar array is fenced, the deer and the moose can't penetrate the array. And that is a benefit for anybody who wants to grow crops. And the one thing I didn't say is that beekeeping is also really a good option for under panels. The second part, I think, was New Hampshire's. Can you say that again, Nikki?
Yes. What's the status of what is the status of New Hampshire solar farms and infrastructure?
Okay, so Linda, please feel free to come off of mute and elaborate if you'd like. Our situation in New Hampshire is, as I said, it's not what it is in our neighboring states. Our policies are far behind the other states. The other states are giving some good benefits to farmers who are installing and growing under solar panels, developers who are doing that dual use situation. And that is really what it takes to make these two things financially compatible. I don't even want to say compatible, financially doable, because the installation of solar has to be done in a way that is much more expensive to install. Maine has recently had a change in their policies, and it has allowed a lot more farm use of solar leases. And Linda asked about solar farms, and what we call these is community solar farms, or CSFs. That is the fact that these larger installations where we're paying a lease for generation to the grid are providing solar electric to businesses, nonprofits, municipalities, individual families who can't generate their own solar. And there's a lot of demand for that. We talk with a lot of people regularly who just don't have a good situation for solar because of shading or orientation or just inappropriate location or lack of ownership of a roof. And those folks want a way to be able to use solar power. And this community solar farm is one way for them to do that. And we're excited to do that in New Hampshire, but it is much less doable than in the other states. So we're working towards it. Linda, does that help?
Yes, I
Okay.
have been looking into trying to put a large tract of my property into solar,
Mhm.
a solar farm, because the fields are not productive. It is pretty level. And in New Hampshire, that's an unusual commodity. But I was running it, I looked into a couple companies. I have not looked into Revision, but I'm outside the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so in order for it to come to me, there has to be a lot more done because I live way out of town.
Yeah.
Let's put
Yeah.
it that way. So
Yeah.
I don't think I have that three-phase. Well, I know I don't have the three-phase
Yeah.
power here. So.
And you're right, Linda, that is the biggest limitation. Our electrical infrastructure in New Hampshire does not have three-phase in the places where land is most available. And that limits the places where we can do solar farms. So I'm happy to take a look and see if you have three-phase solar, if you want to give me a call. But it sounds like you probably don't. And I'm sorry about that, because if you have a field that is marginal and not productive, that's the kind of place where we'd want to do something like this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ellen has her hand up. Shall we go to her?
Well, we have a few more questions in the
Okay.
chat, I think, and then
Yep, that's
Ellen,
great.
I'll call on you. So Carl asked, what is the smallest cost-effective installation?
Carl, are you talking about for leasing or for your own property?
For my own property.
For your own property, to generate your own electricity for use on any size is possible for that. It's only when we get to putting solar out for use in a community solar situation where others are going to take the electric off of the grid because they can't generate their own solar power. But if you want to put solar on your roof or on a ground mount for your farm or for your home, you should be able to do that. There is no minimum. In fact, I know somebody who has 4 panels and that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I had written back to Steve in the chat who was asking about the REAP grants for solar projects on farms, asking if they're still available. And I said yes, but I didn't want to speak for you. I think that you were saying that Revision Energy has sort of helped some farmers with that in the past, and maybe you could just reiterate that for him quickly.
Sure, we actually do write the grants and send them in. And there was just a round that was announced and we got at least one, if not more, REAP grants through that process just recently. So, whether you're working with Revision or someone else, if you are a farm and you now know that REAP grants exist, ask if your solar installer will do an application for you for a REAP grant. Or you may want to ask that question up front and choose someone, if you don't like writing grants, choose someone who will do that for you.
Super, thank you. And Ellen I have you next, if you'd like to hop on.
I have a couple of questions. One is about, and somebody sort of echoed this question about, the quality of what happens to the water and if it's too hot and heat sinking. I mean, if it causes problems for, in terms of climate for the panels like on the ground. And my question is one of kind of like energetics and plants. This would be more like a little bit from the herbalist world, the biodynamic world, of being concerned that the battery might have some interplay with the energetics of the plant and the food that's grown. That was one question. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, I mentioned I'm from Massachusetts.
Ellen, can you speak up? I'm having a hard time hearing
Oh,
you.
sure.
Thank you.
Turn up my volume. Did you hear?
Oh, that's
My volume was low. Didn't realize that.
okay.
Did you hear my question? It was concerned
did,
about the
yes.
energetics of the plant. And then the other question is, I'm living in Mass where 10 McMansions were built around me, many facing south or west, and not one of them has a solar panel on it. And I'm just kind of wondering if there's any move in New Hampshire towards, I mean, you can't enforce it, wish we could, but some really major incentives so that whenever that McMansion goes up, it's like, the developer gets a deal if the solar goes up. Because the homeowner, yes, they might come on board later, but if we can make it attractive to the developer, we don't want him to build a McMansion anyways, but at least we get something out of it.
Yeah. Okay, let me take the McMansion one first. I agree. We don't really need McMansions unless we're putting lots of families in them.
Yeah, right.
I think we will get to a point in time, and there are other places in the United States where having renewable energy as part of the building code is happening. There are a handful of places where that's the case. There are benefits to developers now to building something with energy efficient and renewable energies, and that is there are mortgage companies who will allow a higher mortgage amount if there is infrastructure that will decrease the cost of running the building. So if you have renewable energy, or if you have an energy efficient home that's going to decrease the cost of electricity and the cost of heat on that property, they figure that the homeowner will be able to afford a higher mortgage payment and therefore be paying off the actual infrastructure that makes that so. It's a little harder with a mortgage because a mortgage goes for 30 years and you should have been able to pay off one of those systems in a shorter period of time. So it might be easier to put it on later or put the infrastructure in early on and then put it on later, or take a separate loan outside of the mortgage for that installation. So somebody smarter than I am can figure all that out. But I think there are incentives if people want to take advantage of them to do that. And then let's go to energetics. You know more about energetics than I do, but I want to be clear that there is not necessarily any battery involved in these solar projects. There can be if the landowner would like there to be, and in a lease situation there is not. But what there is those inverters, and this is high voltage electricity. So I don't know. I don't know if there's an impact on energetics and the fields that are around plants and that plants require, if there's any interruption of that, like we expect there might be under high tension wires. This certainly is less intensive than high tension wires, but it is closer to the plants probably. So it's a really interesting question, not one I had considered at all. So yeah, I don't know how you get at that answer.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for not
you.
laughing at that question too, because maybe 15 years ago, somebody would have been like laughing in my face about it. But I think we understand the plants a lot better now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Beth. And I think that Shayna had somewhat of a similar question in the chat, and I see that Shayna is has a hand raised. So would you like to ask your question, Shayna?
Sure, it's Shauna. It's okay.
Shauna.
I
thank
don't
you.
care, but just so you know,
Thank
I'm
you.
so I'm concerned because I read a study at University of Arizona that they took temperatures nighttime and daytime for a year of 3 places. One was the parking lot, one was a commercial solar array over what had been natural desert, and one was the natural desert. And they found that average nighttime temperatures were highest in the solar array, even hotter than the parking lot. And so there's what they call an urban heat island effect for sure there in Arizona on these solar arrays. And they said we really need to do that in lots of regions to make sure, because I think this may be a counterproductive strategy for climate, especially when if it slows down the growth of the plants and the transpiration that would be there. I know places that have older panels, they don't seem to have much growing under them. I didn't hear the most of your beginning of your talk. I'm hoping there's more hopeful examples, but I was curious if you've considered that heat island effect, because they run 30 degrees hotter than the air, and their emissivity is right at the higher end of pavement. It's
Interesting.
It's 90 emissivity, and pavement is 85, is 80 to 95, I believe, depending on the age of the pavement.
I think I don't know about the study that you're talking about. I think it's really interesting, and I'll try and find it to read it.
Yeah, I can send you a link later.
Yeah, that would be great. You have my email here, so if you could do that, that would be fantastic.
I wrote it down.
A couple thoughts. I don't know if the area under the panels in Arizona had things growing under them.
It did.
It did.
In the
Okay.
diagram.
A lot of times, I mean, there are solar panels and solar farms that the strategy for reducing maintenance is to make sure nothing grows. And in those situations, I would be concerned about a lot of different things. But it seems to me that in a more temperate region like New Hampshire, where we have regular rain, and where if we're growing things under solar panels, I would expect we'd still do some irrigation, some drip irrigation underneath. That might be less so. We also don't get the hot temperatures during the day and night that Arizona gets, though. We're getting hotter and hotter all the time. So I'm not sure I can give any, I'm sure I can't give any concrete answer.
Right. So you don't know anywhere where they're taking air temperatures in these arrays. They were doing 2.5 meters up, one thermometer in the middle of each place.
Yeah. I would point you to the University of Massachusetts. If you Google Massachusetts agrivoltaics, I think they have been taking temperatures, and I can't tell you where they've been taking them, but it has been mostly to assess what's happening under the panels as far as the growth of the crops that they're trying to grow. I mean, they've done things like Swiss chard and peppers, hot peppers, tomatoes, some other things as well. And that is one site. The other site may be in Arizona. I think there are 3 sites that they're doing, one in Massachusetts, one in Arizona, and maybe one in Colorado. And you should be able to find links through University of Massachusetts, which is the one that I'm most familiar with. But I think what's really interesting is that they are doing research, and they're trying to figure out what is the best way we can install these solar panels, use the land under them, and reduce the impact of that they have. I mean, clearly, if you put solar panels above an agricultural field, they have an impact. Can it be an impact that allows you to generate more food than you would under a typical solar panel, more energy than you would over a typical crop field? And is there some synergy there where the panels work better and the crops grow better because of the interaction between the two? I'm really pleased that there is some research happening about that, and I hope that research will give us some guidance to where we go from here. I can't say enough about what value there might be in people trying things under solar panels in New Hampshire. And if you know of anybody who has a small solar installation on their property and they're trying to grow things under them, I'd love to connect. So I hope that helps, Shauna. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shauna, and thank you, Beth.
Yes, that's helpful. I just couldn't find the mute button. I'm not looking at the screen because I can't do the light, so it takes me a while to find the buttons.
No problem. So I have another question in here from chat from Joan. And Joan asks, what's the difference between a stationary panel and a rotating panel in input/output, or whatever the term might be for that? And is it worth it for an individual?
Is it worth it for an individual is going to be very dependent on what your situation is. I have actually considered a tracker for myself because my remaining location for solar, when I get an electric car, fully electric car, is in a place that doesn't have really good eastern light. And I would like to be able to collect more western light. But I don't want to face the panels to the west. I don't want to give up the southern sun for the western sun. What I learned in my particular situation is that the installation is much, much more expensive, and the gain in electricity wasn't worth the additional expense for me. There are those who see benefits in having trackers in open spaces, because if the east, south, and west is open to the sunlight, then you can gain solar input much more during the day. And with that, you might be able to cover less land with solar panels. I'd like to see the studies on that, because I think because of the rotation, you would have to keep the solar panels further apart. Whereas the solar panels that you see in my slide here are immediately right next to each other. And there's little space between them. And so does that make up for the ability to rotate and the space that would be needed between them in order to rotate? I don't know. Again, more research would be a fantastic thing. And I know that it's happening. And I know that there's more out there than I've read, but we're still fairly new at this.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions, Joan? Okay. Perfect. And then I see that Shanna put that study into the chat. So I've copied that down. I can send that to you, Beth.
Great, thank you.
Yes. And do we have any other questions? All right. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. We have a comment from Ellen about yes, just such a challenge with the trees and the houses. I totally understand. My mother's house is a similar situation where my mom would never want to cut down the trees, but would be interested in solar.
Well, those community solar farms will be more available someday. I think as we get started, we'll be looking to work more with larger users of electricity so that we can learn through the process. And as we've done in Maine, we are now actually working with individual households to share the electricity from those solar panels. So that's what we look forward to in New Hampshire. It's going to need to take time, and we're working towards it. And I look forward to being part of the process to help learn these things that we don't know yet.
Thank you. Beth, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up our session today?
I just say a big thanks to those of you who are attending and those who are watching the recording. And I encourage you all to find the best way for you to find reasonable renewable resources to power your life or reduce the power in your life. And we just look forward to stopping the craziness that is the climate these days.
Yes, thank you so much. And as everyone's seen, you have Beth's email and contact information right there on the screen that you can copy down or contact us at NOFA if you'd like to get in touch and don't remember her email address. I'm going to pop some links into the chat, and thank you again. This concludes our session. Beth, really appreciate your time and for sharing all of your knowledge and this really fantastic information for us, for homeowners, for farmers, about how folks can get started with solar power. And again, thank you all for being with us today as well. And we hope that you'll join us for the next session, which is tree forages and browse for livestock year round, continued learning at Three Streams Farm. And that's at 1:30 p.m. And I put the link in the chat to get to that next session. And if you haven't already, please check out our virtual exhibitor fair featuring 17 different exhibitors, including our conference bookstore hosted by Main Street Bookends. And when you order any books through Main Street Bookends and include NOFA NH in the comments, 20% of proceeds are donated back to NOFA. And please also mark your calendars for some of our upcoming events. We have a Farm Bill listening session on February 17th. That's this upcoming Thursday, and it's at noon. And our Feeding the Family Organic Gardening Series is 6 sessions from February 22nd to May 3rd in the evenings. Also, please check out our bulk order program to save on farming and gardening supplies. And the order deadline is February 28th, with pickups on March 19th and 20th in Andover, New Hampshire, Ware, and Rochester. And thank you so much again for joining us. I hope you have a lovely day.